The last window at Outpost Marin 7 was mine. It was a scratched panel of composite glass set in a prefab wall, and I had been standing behind it for 6 days without relief. 1,143 souls processed. Name, species, planet of origin, sponsoring party code, biometric stamp. The queue never stopped until it stopped, and when it stopped, it was because the shuttle had lifted and the next one wasn't due for 8 hours. The Grath column was 3 days out. Everyone on Marin 7 knew it. The Colonial Transit Authority had issued the evacuation order in 2 stages. The dependent families first, then the unaccompanied adults. 2 convoys remained. The second to last lifted at 0600 the following morning. The final convoy, my convoy, the staff shuttle, lifted 31 hours after that. I was eating a cold ration pack at my desk when she appeared at the window. She was small, ashen-skinned, the color of old chalk, with oversized amber eyes that caught the work light and held it without blinking. Pointed ears swept back from her temples. She wore what had been, at some earlier point, a pale ceremonial garment, now worn through at the elbows and re-hemmed with rough cord. Around her neck, on a braided leather string, hung a carved bone marker. The carving was dense and deliberate, a maker's mark, or a family name, or a prayer. I did not know which. She pressed one small hand against the glass and stood there in the work light, perfectly still, the way a creature stands when it has learned that stillness is the safest thing available. She did not speak. I pushed back my chair and opened the service hatch. "Come around," I said. I don't know if she understood the words or just the gesture, but she came around. Her name was Essa. I learned that in the first 10 minutes, mostly because I held up my own transit badge, Reyes, Caldwell, and said my name slowly, until something shifted in her expression, and then she pressed one finger to her sternum and said one syllable. Essa. I wrote it down. That was the extent of our common language for the next several hours. I checked every list. I ran her bone markers carved sequence through the intake system 3 ways. I cross-referenced the dependent registries for every species cohort that had passed through Marin 7 in the past 6 days. I pulled the unaccompanied minor manifests for all 3 previous convoys. There was no record of her, no sponsoring party, no planet of origin on file, no family name in any registry I had access to. She sat on the chair beside my desk and ate half of my ration pack, the grain-pressed bar, not the protein paste, which she examined and set down politely, and watched me work. When I looked up from the screen, she looked back. Her eyes were the color of old brass lamps. I started building the file anyway. You do the work that is in front of you. That is something my father said, and he was a stubborn and frequently unreasonable man. But he was not wrong about that. The work in front of me was getting Essa onto the second-to-last convoy. I had 9 hours. I was 3 hours into the intake form, species designation, physical descriptors, approximate age listed as minor, indeterminate, per standard protocol, when Regional Controller Haas arrived for his pre-dawn inspection. Haas was a thin man with the manner of someone who had spent 30 years enforcing rules he had not written, and was proud of that fact. He reviewed my screen from behind my shoulder, said nothing for a moment, and then said, "She's unpapered." "She is," I said. "I'm working on it." "Working on what, exactly? There's no sponsoring party." "I'm aware. The intake protocol requires a sponsoring party for unaccompanied non-citizen minors. It has required this for 11 years. It's not a gap in the system, Reyes. It's the system working correctly." I kept typing. "The second-to-last convoy manifests close in 4 hours," he said. "She won't be on it." "I heard you." He left. His deputy lingered in the doorway for a moment, looking at Essa, then left too. Essa had watched the whole exchange without moving. When the door closed, she looked at me. I held up one finger, one moment, and went back to the forms. I found the clause at hour 5. Dependent Provisional Registration, Colonial Transit Code, Section 14, Article 9, Subsection F. Wartime measure. Enacted during the Harith incursion, 43 years prior. It allowed a registered colonial transit employee, in the event of an active displacement emergency, which Marin 7 was, formally, as of 72 hours ago, to register a single unpapered dependent for emergency transit authorization on their own recognizance, with full personal liability for the dependent's conduct and resettlement processing. It had never been repealed, it had simply been forgotten. I read it 4 times, then I printed it, clipped it to the intake form I had been building for 5 hours, and walked to the comptroller's office. Haas read it. He read it again. He set it down on his desk. This provision, he said, has not been used in 30 years. 34. The last use was on Verath Station during the Kolhari mass displacement. I checked. It was a wartime measure. There is a Grath occupation column 68 hours from this station. The authority's own displacement order is still active. By definition, we are in an active displacement emergency. He was quiet for a moment. This would make you personally liable for her resettlement processing. Any legal complications, I understand what it means. If she has outstanding warrants in any system we pass through. She is a child, Comptroller. She is small enough to fit in my desk chair. I'll take the liability. He picked up the form again. His jaw was tight. He was a man who enforced the system, and I had just handed him the system. You'd be giving up your staff transit priority, he said. It was his last card. If you register her as a dependent, your classification changes. You'd need to board the second-to-last convoy with her. You'd forfeit your berth on the staff shuttle. Yes, I said. That's correct. Do you want to stamp it, or should I find someone who will? He stamped it. I walked back to my desk. Essa was still in the chair, the bone marker held in both hands, her thumb tracing the carved lines the way you trace something you have memorized. She looked up when I came in. I held out my hand, palm up. It is a gesture that means different things in different species' languages. In her case, watching me, she seemed to understand it as, "Come with me, it is time." She took my hand. We stood in the boarding queue for 40 minutes, in the pre-dawn cold of Marin 7, my transit bag over one shoulder, Essa's small weight against my side. The floodlights over the pad lit everything flat and bright, and the queue shuffled forward in the slow, exhausted way of people who have been waiting for days and can hardly believe the wait is almost over. She had not let go of the bone marker. When the ramp lowered and the line began to move, I felt her grip tighten once. Not in fear, exactly, but in the particular way that a small being holds on to the only solid thing available. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would mean anything in a language she had. I put my arm around her shoulders, and we walked up the ramp together. The shuttle broke atmo at 0640. Through the porthole, Marin 7 shrank to a pale disk, and then to nothing. Somewhere behind us, in 30 hours, the staff shuttle would lift the last of the authority personnel. Somewhere 3 days further behind that, the Grath column would arrive to find an empty outpost. Essa slept against my arm before we cleared the transit lane. The bone marker was still in her hand. I looked at her for a while. The amber eyes closed, the breathing evening out, the small face slack with the particular exhaustion of children who have been frightened for a very long time and have finally, briefly, stopped. I thought about the resettlement forms waiting for me on the other end, about the species registry searches I still needed to run, and the family trace requests I would file on her behalf, and the long administrative work of building a person a record where none existed. I thought about my land survey contract, which was technically still active but practically void once the Grath took Marin 7's sector. None of that was the work in front of me right now. The work in front of me was this: a child asleep in a seat beside me, holding a carved bone marker, breathing slowly in the recycled air of a transit shuttle, climbing away from a moon that had already begun to forget us both. I leaned back against the headrest and closed my eyes. That was enough. That was the whole of it.